I've never been to a conference like this. What you're doing is like a magic trick. Hey there, I'm Josh Friberg, and I work as a transformational MC, helping with conferences, retreats, and conventions to make them more connected and collaborative. And recently, I was leading an event when this guy, Brian, came up to me. Brian's probably in his 60s or so, and he said, Josh, I've been in the corporate world for decades. And he said, I've been to over 500 conferences or conventions. And what we've been doing here this weekend, well, I've never been to a conference like this before. He said, it's like a magic trick. I asked him to tell me more, and I'm going to share with you some of the key learnings that I got from this conversation and how you can up-level your conference and convention using some of these tactics. So Brian said, I've been to all these conferences and conventions, and they're all kind of the same. It's like speaker and then a speaker, and then there's a break, and then there's like laser lights and smoke machines, maybe some networking time, maybe some breakouts, but it's all really just passive learning. He said, I go to these conferences, but the biggest reason I go is for what happens in the hallway afterwards, or the time that I'm able to connect with people I haven't seen for a while, or friends. But honestly, the just cattle car of going to the different speakers, he goes, I've seen it all. I've heard it all. And he said, but this conference is different. He goes, I can't wait to get back into the room, get back into the conference room. And I said, well, let me share with you, let me pull back the curtain on the magic trick and share with you some of the secrets for making a transformational event. And this is what my clients hire me to come in and do, is they say, hey, take a look at our conference. We've got these different pieces on it, but we really want our people to be changed. We want them to have an experience and really be transformed and be different than they were when they came to the conference. And so what is this work of being a transformational MC and creating events that are more transformational conferences where we do more than just talk at people? Well, one of the first things that I really think about, and I really see this when I watch really entertaining MCs, because I'm going to be honest, this is a little bit of a pet peeve of mine, is they're often like very funny, they're very interesting in that regard, but I always feel like the time is wasted. Like all we're doing is energy for the sake of energy. You see this a lot with like icebreakers, that we're doing icebreakers and they're fun and they're clever, but are they really moving people toward the purpose that they came? Remember that the folks that came to a conference or convention, my goodness, the amount of work that they've put into that, they, had to get maybe a house sitter. They've got to get their kids all taken care of for while they're away on this trip. They got to pack, they get on a plane, they got to eat weird food, they got to get booked in a hotel, get a car, get booked into a hotel. They spent hours and hours, days maybe of time. They've spent a whole bunch of money and effort to get into the room for a purpose, right? Because they want what you were promising as an event coordinator. If you've been to a conference before, you came for a reason. And if suddenly we're engaged in a game for the sake of having a game, well, that's not really why I came. I came maybe to improve my business, to improve my life, to work on my relationships, to learn this new skill, not necessarily just to play a game. And so we need to think through the energizers that we do during these events. And my contention is that we can create energizers for events that actually are aligned with the purpose of our event. We can create energizers for an event that actually are aligned with our purpose. I have a great event coming up soon, working with some rescue trainers, right? People who certify and train first responders and other types of agencies to do really intense rescue exercises. Well, we had talked about maybe some ways to get people to connect, get people to get to know each other, get the energy level high, and said, how can we do it in a way that's aligned with our purpose. And we're actually going to do a game where they're going to create miniature models of their, rescue setups and scenarios, and they're going to field test them and learn about them, all while doing that in small group exercises with people they've never met. There's going to be some competitiveness to it. This is a great way that we can have energy with purpose, energy that's aligned to the goals of the event. Another simple way that we often do this, that I'll often open an event with, is simply asking people, why did you choose to come to this event? Why are you here? And then curate them into conversations with a few other people sitting near them or other people that they're meeting at the conference. And the cool thing is, you can do this with a group of 12. You can do this with a group of 1,200. The size doesn't matter, because as soon as you break people into groups of 3, guess what? Everybody's just in a group of 3. Well, why is this important, right? Why would this be better than running around sharing what your favorite hobby is or who has the same, color t-shirt on? Well, because it's helping them connect to their own purpose for being there. And when people are connected to their purpose for being there, they're going to be more engaged. That brings me to my second point. Engagement, not entertainment, right? There's a lot of talk in the conference industry. There's a lot of talk in the speaking industry around audience engagement. And a lot of what I see that is done for the sake of audience engagement is another gimmick. It's another gimmick, right? Because in order for an audience to be engaged, they have to be engaged in an action. They have to be engaged in an activity. They have to be doing something. And it can't just be like call and response stuff, right? Like raise your hand if, turn to your neighbor, right? Like actually help them create work product, allow them to be creative, and allow them to participate fully. It means that up front, as we're on stage, and I have to experience this all the time, is we have to be open to being changed and transformed as much as we're asking those in the audience to be changed and transformed. If we want audience engagement, engage them in something. Now, the simplest way to do that is to think about experiential learning. Create an actual, real experience in the room. Passive listening is not an experience. So what we can do, though, is we could start with a little bit of passive listening, where we're going to set up some information. We're going to create a common vocabulary. We're going to create a few key lessons that people might be learning from the experience that they're about to have. But we want to keep that to a minimum. As our attention spans are getting lower, shorter and shorter, we're going to want to be really thoughtful about keeping our passive listening time shorter and shorter. Immediately, though, we can move people into experiential learning, a time when they actually get to practice the thing that's being asked of them, right? That they actually get to do some small version of what the speaker, the subject matter expert, is actually talking about, right? Give them a chance to do it for real. One of the things that happens so often at conferences is you leave with a really smart notebook and a whole bunch of homework that you never get around to. When we're putting conferences together, when we're putting retreats together, let's help people not leave with homework. Let's give them time and space to actually do the work in the room in real time, right? We do this a lot when it comes to like business planning experiences, workshops where people are going to actually write a business plan. Well, bust out your pocket calculator and let's do this. Like, let's actually create the business plan in real time so that you get to leave having completed it. So we start with information, then we're going to move to an experience. And then here's the key, and this is the key to adult learning, is they have to reflect on the experience. Right? They actually have to think about what it was. Now, here's a couple simple ways to do that. I actually saw this modeled really well recently by a consultant from AE Sloan Consulting, a guy named Dr. Daniel White, where he said, okay, we just did this thing. for the last 12 minutes. And then he said, now what I'd like you to do is get up in the balcony. He gets that language from Todd Balsinger. Go up in the balcony, and I want you to observe yourself having just had the experience. And then he asked this question: what was that experience like? What was that experience like for you? Right. One of my other favorite questions comes from John Berghoff of the Exchange Approach. He says, what can you notice was made possible? I'm not sure if that question's his originally or not, but it is a question he taught me. What can you notice was made possible in these last few minutes? What's great is when we ask people this and we actually listen to them, give them opportunity to have voice, well, then we will learn lessons from them as well, and they'll learn lessons from each other. We as the subject matter experts, as the host, the MC, the speaker, well, we may have an idea of what the learning is that's here, but there may be dozens of other learnings happening in a room. And when we access those, guess what? Now we learn something new that we can then apply, and then we can use for the next group that we're leading or convening. And then here's the last thing, and I just sort of hinted at it. What is the magic trick of creating transformational events? Well, it's peer-to-peer learning. It's peer-to-peer learning. And one of the ways that I think about this, it's a little bit of kind of a gambling analogy, right? Is if we grab the dice, right, at the craps table and we start rolling the dice, if you roll it enough times, right, like snake eyes is going to come up. If you roll it enough times, right, you're going to get 2 1s. Doesn't matter. Just roll it enough times. Well, maybe you've been to a large event, right? There's 500 people there, 1,000 people there, 10,000 people there. Maybe it was a small event, a small retreat with 12 people or 15 people or 18 people. And you've had the experience of going, oh my gosh, you and I went to the same high school together. Or, oh my goodness, your mentor was the first person who ever hired me, right? Have you ever had those sort of, put this in air quotes, miraculous experiences, miraculous encounters with someone else? Well, I used to think those were pretty miraculous. And I hate to pull back the curtain on you, if you have some like metaphysical explanation for that. But I've now done enough of these events that I realize that the miracle is simply the law of large numbers. That if you put 1,000 people in a room and you give them 10, 12, 14 opportunities to have conversations with people, or some of the events that I'm doing, I'm even talking about 30, 40, 50 conversations a day that we're curating and designing on purpose. We'll multiply that by the hundreds of people that are in the room. And guess what? You've just created thousands upon thousands of conversations and interactions. And guess what's going to happen when you do that? Well, there's going to be miracles all day long. Somebody is going to say, hey, I've been trying to get my foot in the door at this company, and I just found out that this person's mom works there, and they're going to make an introduction for me, right? Well, we can do that when we create peer-to-peer learning opportunities. So that's one way that peer-to-peer learning helps a lot. Here's the other way that helps peer-to-peer learning work is if we're all looking at the same thing, but doing it from different angles. We all have different perspectives, different vocabularies, different ways of explaining that. We have different insights, experience, and expertise that we can lend to the question. So when we ask an expert to speak, that's great because they do have a really great informed perspective. And they have one perspective, right? And so our expert may say, hey, here's the key learning we can get from this. But if we invite dozens of voices in the room, hundreds of voices in the room, if we listen and we create peer-to-peer learning, guess what? All of these amazing insights and learnings come to the fore. When we put together a large conference or an event, I always think this is particularly true when you talk about like corporate events. You may look at the budget of an event and think, wow, that's an expensive event. I got to work at an event. It was $2.5 million event. Pretty crazy when by the time you included everything that was involved. That's not even 10% or 20% of the cost of that room, right? Why? Because the expense of the room is the cost that everyone in that room paid to be there, right? And I'm not talking about their ticket to get in the door, to get their wristband, to get their name tag on their lanyard. I'm talking about that's a person who makes an hourly wage at home, and they are foregoing that. That's someone who has other life responsibilities, life energy that they're expending as part of a community, as part of their family. And all of that goes on pause for the 3 days that they're at your conference. We have one of the most expensive events possible. And yet what are we doing? We're taking really smart, really interesting and insightful people and asking them to sit quietly and listen. Why? What if we instead invite them to participate and get to take advantage of the amazing value that they bring? Well, this becomes a really, really worthwhile investment. Well, as I talked to Brian, the corporate guy who'd been to over 500 conferences in his life, I said, that's the magic trick. It may not seem so magic. And he said, no, this is transformational. This is really how people get changed. But I'd like to ask you a question, and maybe you can respond in the comments, is when have you been to a conference or convention that was really transformational? And what do you think was the key ingredient that caused it to be so transformational? Write something in the comments. I'd love to respond to those and see how that fits in with what we're talking about in today's video. If you're looking to transform your event, we have to do them differently. We're not going to get there by having funnier, more entertaining icebreakers. We're not going to get there by having more engaging speakers, right? We're not going to get there by having one-to-many learning. Instead, we're going to get there when we have energy creating activities that are purposeful. We're going to do that when we commit to engagement through experiential learning, and we're going to get there when we open up peer-to-peer insight and learning. This is a way that you can elevate your event. It's why I love being a transformational MC, and it's one of the ways that I can help you. So if you have questions about a conference, a retreat, a convention that you have coming up, and you'd like some insight on how you could make that more transformational, I'd love to talk to you more.